Yeah, thanks Liz and team. That was an excellent session, really interesting, thought-provoking, and certainly from, well, the experience on our table, there was lots of engagement, but obviously we've got the feedback from the other tables as well, and you can see that was similar across the room. So yeah, very thought-provoking and yeah, really interesting for me, and obviously the people around me as well. So yeah, obviously recognise that people want to be sort of heading off, and travel's not the easiest thing at the moment. Hopefully everything will go smoothly when people return home this evening. But just a few sort of closing remarks, sort of things that I've thought about through the day, and some of the summary points. Right from the start, I think the opening address, something that sort of set the scene for the day for me was that this notion of sort of winning well should be the focus, and I think that sort of resonates through a lot of discussions that we've had through the day, and also sort of taps into this notion and the importance of value-based education. And I think that is something that, again, that's sort of a thread that ran through the day, but also linked into the athlete support personnel session, where there was that discussion about inadvertent doping being the focus, but is that problematic? And then later in the day, we sort of went back to that and that discussion about, you know, well, if we focus more on sort of value-based education and introduce that early within the education, early in people's lives, then people make the right choices later on. And obviously, there's a passion and a motivation to learn about inadvertent doping as well as other forms of doping in terms of intentional doping. Interestingly, we had that sort of discussion around whether doping is an issue in parasport, and I think, you know, across the day, I think the conclusion is that doping is still an issue and one that we should consider. And one for me that I thought around was that often we get this discussion within non-disabled sport as well, as whether doping is an issue in other sports. And yeah, it's not an issue in my sport. So I wonder if we're seeing a little bit of that here, in that, you know, it's not such an issue in parasport. And I think one of the questions that was asked around that was, you know, why would it not be an issue? And definitely we've seen at the end there some of the importance in ways in which we can actually make sure that we tailor sessions around doping prevention in the right way as well. Obviously, another thing that we talked about and that was covered throughout the day was this notion of clean sport being more than doping-free sport, but not necessarily equivalent to fair sport. And that a lot of that comes down to definitions. We won't get back into that debate now. But obviously, we need to think about fair sport, we need to think about clean sport, and also whether clean sport is the right term. And certainly some of the discussions we've had, some of the people I've spoken to, is whether, you know, the fact that people have these multiple definitions and understandings of what clean sport is, and whether that's a problem in itself. But obviously doping, you know, and I certainly agree that doping is something that we still need to focus on very heavily in terms of preventing within parasport. But we have obviously got these other very sort of specific integrity issues that are particular issues for the athletes. Classification fraud being one of those. And then this afternoon we saw that sort of shift and focus more on boosting in the panel discussion. And what is common across those two is obviously that these are difficult things to regulate. They're very complex, very difficult to regulate. But you know, for me, and I think that's the general feeling that I've got from people, is that it's important not to shy away from something that's difficult to regulate. Just because it's difficult to regulate shouldn't mean we shouldn't do it. Our decision on whether we should tackle it or not is whether it's impacting on people's on fair sport and taking it back to that, and whether we're winning well and in the right way. So I think we do need to tackle those issues. Another problem that's come through around that is obviously because they're complex issues, it means that we've probably got a need for more research. And Ali certainly talked quite a lot, and we've talked about the importance of understanding prevalence, but also understanding how we best regulate and manage these issues is important as well. And these are obviously things that we still need. We need the funding for the research, but we also need to decide who's going to govern it as well, and we need the funding for that governance as well when we do understand how to regulate it. And there's some of the open questions that are sort of left for us. And I've sort of intentionally sort of moved us towards these issues around governance and these systemic issues, because the other thing that I wanted to sort of end on here was to sort of point towards our next Insight Forum, so the fourth Clean Insight Forum, which will be in Munster on 22nd of November. So we intentionally put it on the 22nd to help my poor memory. So we've moved from June to November, but we're still on the 22nd. So if anyone fancies a trip to Munster, just as we're approaching Christmas, that's where our next Insight Forum is going to be. But what we're going to do within that one, so obviously there's been a lot of the athlete voice today, and we'll obviously continue that forward into Munster. But we are going to focus much more on these sort of systemic perspectives, and also, how we regulate this. And within Germany, we've got the IPC, we've also got INADO, so we're going to try and sort of tap into some of these sort of major bodies that can help with us answering some of these questions around governance and these systemic perspectives, and how we take this forward in terms of these future directions. Obviously, we're not going to resolve how we regulate these issues between now and November, but we can bring people to the table who might be able to sort of give us some insight and reflection on that. So that's the direction we're moving in over the next few months. We've also got ongoing research that's going to help towards that as well. And some of you may have already received invitations to take part in a Delphi poll that's looking at some of these issues and how we would, what are some of the unique requirements for education for athlete support personnel and for para athletes. And within that, how we inform relevant policy. And some of the findings from that will obviously feed into these sort of systemic perspectives in November. So yeah, just to end the day, thank everyone for their engagement and for attendance, despite what could have been potential problems in getting here, and it's been great to see everyone. And thanks again to UCAD for hosting the day. Thanks, everyone.